dealing with problem soils. And we've, again, you know, when you think about, I keep going back to when you're analyzing your yard, because, and this is, you know, it's, these things are all really kind of design problems. And so when you're thinking about how you want to use your yard, you think about, I want to have a flower bed here. What is happening here? I want to have a yard for my children to play in over here. What's happening here? So the main problems, to lump them together, that we need to remediate are wet or poorly draining soil, soil that's too compacted, that probably has had, you know, traffic on it, or used to have a building on it, or has something has really caused it to become too compacted. Soil that is too loose, which is not really that common a problem in our area, as we don't have that much sandy soil, and anaerobic clay, which is also called marine clay, with a lot of people find in lenses in this area. So for wet or poorly draining soil, I mean, you can observe it on the surface, but you may want to really get a handle on how badly your soil drains. And this is essentially the same thing as what people call a perk test. So you dig a hole, you fill the hole with water, you let it drain, and then you refill it. So you're measuring how, the second time you fill it, you're going to measure how fast the water drains out of it. So ideally 2 inches an hour. Less than 1 inch an hour means you need to do something about the drainage. And as we've been talking about, there are a number of things you can do. You can find another area to drain it to. So you're going to find an adjacent area to drain the water to. If you have a slowly draining area, you might have to slope the soil towards an area where it can drain. And you may need to create a pathway or a swale to a drainage area or a drain pipe. And one alternative is to put in a French drain, which is low grade. It's a perforated drain tile that's wrapped in filter fabric and then surrounded by gravel that's wrapped in a filter fabric. And that'll allow the soil to, the rain to infiltrate into the drain, and it'll hold it until it can naturally be absorbed by the soil. Also, you know, it's really important to note that you don't want to work with the soils when they're wet, because it will make them compacted, and it will make the drainage even worse. So the idea is that you really want to add organic material that's going to lighten your soil up. It's going to make it absorb more water. And if you're still having a problem, try one of these drainage alternatives. Compacted soil. Compacted soil, you know, you can get it around where you used to have an old tree, adjacent to a driveway, often people have it adjacent to the road where it was improperly compacted, probably maybe during construction. And it's just really dense soil. You can't get a pitchfork into it without stepping on it. The water runs off of it. You can't get a plant started in it. And it's a very frustrating area. It's sometimes described when it's adjacent to the street or a driveway as a hell strip. So it tends to be dry and very, very, very hard. So, you know, again, you don't want to work on this soil when it's wet, because it'll just make it worse. And if it's adjacent to a pathway or someplace where people walk all the time, maybe you want to create a designated pathway so that people aren't trampling it all the time, and create a flower bed. So you want to aerate the soil, you want to loosen it, and then you want to add organic material that will start to loosen that soil up, and it'll bring some air into it. Because when you think about plants, they need sun, they need water, but they need air. Soil has got to hold enough air that their roots can breathe. So that's one of the real problems with compacted soils. So loose soil. When I started working on this presentation, I thought, well, loose soil, I mean, what do you do with loose soil? Well, in a way, it's the same problem. You want to you do not want to encourage drainage to go that way, because then you're going to have a lot of erosion. You need to add organic material, and then you want to protect it by planting it with plants that are going to hold it in place, or they're going to stabilize it. And you want to discourage traffic from walking over that area, because it'll dislodge it. And then of course you want to mulch the exposed soil. So what you want to do is hold it in place, mulch it until you can, because the plant's roots will begin to hold that soil in place. And then there's anaerobic clay, and we do have quite a bit of that in this area. Everyone has clay, and then everyone says, oh, I have clay, my garden's clay, it's not good. You know, clay is actually a great soil. It's the most nutritionally rich soil that we have. Now, it has the problem of being compacted. This marine clay is a slightly different animal. It's actually a deposited clay. So it's a clay that has eroded off the land and been deposited in a marine environment. And it tends to be in areas that are water saturated. And if you notice the ghastly gray color is because it has no organic material in it. It's just, that's what anaerobic means. It's got no biological activity in it. So there are no little fine plant roots, there are no little soil animal things eating anything that's in the ground. So it presents a whole drainage problem all of its own, because you really do almost have to treat it like a container, like an impermeable container in your garden. And you have to decide whether you're going to create a way to treat it as a barrier and create a natural pond or a rain garden. The other thing is that one of the recommendations I've seen for this is native trees that are adapted to wet soil can live in this type of environment, and they eventually will break down the clay environment. So, which I think is just, I mean, it's a wonderful thing to think about, that these tree roots will eventually be able to break this soil down. Once we've mitigated our soil problems, we want to add plants to protect and improve the soil, because that is exactly what plants do. And the roots of the plants themselves improve the soil. And also the leaf litter from plants will also help improve the soil. So they prevent evaporation, they shade the soil and reduce water requirements, which is an interesting way of looking at it, because they do also take up water. Their roots improve the water retention capability of the soil. Different root profiles of plants, and they vary all over the place, from very wide and shallow to very deep. And you know, the plants will reduce erosion, and then they do provide natural compost by their leaf litter. If we keep it on the site, if we clean it up and keep it in the beds, it does provide natural compost. So the another thing to do is expand your tree canopy. So trees, they capture rainfall, and they allow for, they absorb the water from the ground and they aspirate it into the air. So you just think of them as a huge, like a fountain in the air. And they do, their tree roots are very broad reaching. And you know, again, you know, the tree canopy shades the ground. It cools the earth, and that makes it more adaptable for other types of plants. So if you have an opportunity to plant a tree, white oaks are great trees. and they support a huge number of natural species. A lot of people have lawns. Lawns are the only really kind of plant cover that we have that you can walk on, that you can actively walk on, but they have a very shallow root structure. So again, they're like 8 inches where other plants will be 2 or 3 feet. And then they're often in areas that are very compacted because people have mowed them, walked on them, played on them. The soil is very compacted, and they are maintained by frequent watering and fertilizing. And they do, in a way, act as a hardscape. If you have a lawn, you really need to think about where that lawn drains to. It would be best if it drained to a flower bed or some other very absorptive area that would take up the excess water. So lawns are a beautiful thing. They're a useful thing, but put them in for a purpose and find out way to make them a productive part of your landscape. We are always advocating for, and is the right plant in the right place. Their plants are great. We're trying to match plants that will do well in their location and will benefit the overall environment. So we recommend native plants because they have evolved to adapt to local soil and climate conditions and local insects and animals so that they support wildlife. And also they're going to be lower maintenance and more likely to thrive. And these plants, as somebody said to me yesterday, these plants can be beautiful. And it's like, yes, they are. They're beautiful. The idea that we're going to plant native plants and they're going to have small and unattractive blooms is completely false. You will find them well maintained to be a real asset to your yard. When we think about plants, we think about how to use them. We think, oh, I want to have continuous bloom. Oh, I want this area to have all yellow and white flowers. And so we focus on those kinds of things. But really, you also need to think about matching plants to the moisture requirements of your soil conditions. We've looked at our yards, we've analyzed our yards, and we know where we have moist areas and we know where we have dry areas. So we're going to use the right plants in the right place. So these are just some examples, and there are probably hundreds of them. And when you go and look online, or when you go to a garden center, it's not all that hard to say what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a bush that's going to grow to around 6 feet high, and it's flowering, and I need it for a wet location, or I need it for a damp location, or I need it for a dry location. These are all plants that do well in dry locations. A lot of grasses do well in dry locations. And certainly a number of trees are adapted to that. I also point out on the most herbs like thyme and sage, they are originally from the Mediterranean, and they are all adapted to dry locations. So, and there are trees that do better in drier locations. We are very blessed to have a lot of oak trees in our area because they do support a lot of wildlife. And they do very well in wet locations and in dry locations. Also, I don't know about the rest of you, but I love linden trees, and they do well in dry locations. So plants for wetter soil. You'd be surprised how many of our plants are adapted for wet soils. And think of all of the creeks and the streams in this area. I, in my own garden, have winterberry holly. It's a fantastic plant. The sweet bay magnolia. A A lot of people grow milkweed for the monarch butterflies. It does well in wet locations. And even the common violet, which is, you see it everywhere, but it does very well in wet locations. Next, please. And trees. So I live with a creek behind me, and when I look out in my backyard, I have sycamores, I've got yellow poplars, I've got river birch, I've got sweet gum, and the bald cypress, which I didn't realize for a long time was a native, is a fantastic tree. It is just an absolute beautiful specimen. It grows in clumps and does very, very well in our climate. So again, you know, we live in an area where there are numerous opportunities for tree giveaways. I know I live in the city of Falls Church, and our local organization, VIPUS, has a free tree planting service. And again, this information has been distributed to you all. Okay, questions?
Yes, thank you, Beth. There was a question about whether pine needles are just as good as deciduous leaves for mulch.
You know, I think they are. I like pine needles myself. I think they do very well as mulch.
Do you have an opinion about whether moisture monitors are worth buying or worth the money?
I'll tell you what, I'm kind of old fashioned. You know, I go out and stick my finger in the ground and see if it feels like it's moist. I don't, but I suppose a meter might do it as well.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for smaller trees that tolerate wet soils?
You know, again, I'm going to send you to the resources. I really do think this Plant Nova Natives, native plants for Northern Virginia, that's available. If you go to their website, as either you can print it out or you can see it on their website, I would check there first. Okay, so we've got this great, we've cleaned up and fixed up our soil. And we've decided where we want to plant things, and we have successfully planted them. And now we want to make sure that they are happy. Our plants are happy in the ground. And so we're going to use mulch to limit soil erosion and preserve soil. And again, mulch is going to do all the things that we've been talking about. I mean, it's just, first of all, add organic material, because over time it will degrade and become part of the soil, and you will mix it into the soil. It'll help the soil hold water, because you don't want to have to water these plants. You really want to create a garden where you're holding the water on the site and you are not having to water. Now, it's been very wet the last 3 years, I admit, but I think I have watered my garden once. And I think that's because over time, and I have lived in this house for 30 years, so I've had time to work on the soil, but I have improved the soil and it does hold moisture. And I also rely on plants that don't really, that they're native plants and they don't really require a lot of excess watering. But you know, mulching can be reduced, as they say, as the natural processes take over. So you keep your leaf deposits, instead of hauling them away, you keep them on your beds, and it will just creates this you know, living colony of soil microbes and beneficial insects in the soil. That I mulch a lot because I hate weeds. I'm all about getting the weeds out early and trying to keep them away. And so spring mulching helps control weeds and holds moisture around plants because we're going to have dry times during the summer. And then fall mulching provides insulation to plant roots for over the winter, which, you know, you would think goes without saying, but the roots do, the roots do suffer damage if they do get cold in the winter. So there's all kinds of mulch available. And again, and we just, someone just asked, is pine straw? It's easy to work with. You can get leaf mulch from the county. I know I'm from the city of Falls Church. You can use material from your garden. If you have areas where you really are trying to discourage plant growth, you can use newspaper or cardboard and put mulch over the top of it so it looks better. The only thing I would say about any of these choices is that each one of them may be more or less acidic. And so that's another reason why you don't just do a soil test once and then say, my soil is XYZ. You need to think about it and go back and think, I've been putting wood chips on my lawn for 2 years. And they're going to be more acidic by their nature, so that you may want to test your soil and see if you need to adjust. So you may need to take some other measures to adjust, like the pH of your soil, or provide the correct nutrients. And so it's always good to retest your soil. So I'll just tell you that I had an area in my lawn, and I had a Japanese maple planted there, and it died. And I was kind of shocked because it seemed like in every way that it would be a good location for a Japanese maple. So we just decided it probably had succumbed to drought because they're very drought intolerant. And so we planted another one, and that one also died. And I thought, well, there's something strange going on here. So we dug down and found out there was an old piece of footing from an old wall underneath there, and that the soil was very alkaline because the alkalinity had been leaching out of the old concrete from the wall. So we took that out of there, but still the soil was very alkaline. Well, Japanese maples like acidic soil. So it was time to choose another plant for that place. So we planted something else there, and we'll see how well that does. But, always consider that you may need to retest your soil. And also, you can create your own mulch by composting. And we are actually going to be giving a class on composting. So I'm just going to touch on it here in the first week in April. But the whole concept behind composting is that you want to, again, I said, you need food, you need moisture, and you need air. So that's the idea between the brown leaves, the grass clippings. And so you've got the green brown idea is that you have fresh plant material that is providing nutrients, and you have the brown leaves so that it can get air into it, and you're going to add moisture, and that's going to help that whole decomposition process. And it says here kitchen scraps. I would warn you, do not put any kind of meat or animal remains into your compost, or you will get rats. And you don't want to do that. They're not going to help you that much. So vegetable scraps. And always, someone just said, and rinse eggshells before composting. Yeah, people do like to add eggshells, but you have to be careful because it really will attract animals. Okay, so someone I think was just asking this question, what to do about the leaves. Well, they will decompose naturally and become part of the landscape. You've got to dig them in. You're going to have to consider that you're going to have to dig them in. If you find that you still have a lot of excess leaves underneath your bushes and stuff, well, put them in your compost pile. You know, what we do in our yard is we have little areas of lawn, and we rake the leaves off the lawn and into our beds that are around the edge of the lawn. And so it does both, you know, get rid of our leaves and creates some good mulch. But we do always bring in mulch every year, as I said, because I do not really enjoy spending a lot of time weeding. Again, you know, there are good ways to apply mulch and bad ways to apply mulch. So you want to remove or cut the weeds first, because just mulching over the top of them is not really going to get rid of them. And you want to attack your weeds before they go to seed, or else you're just going to have weed seeds that are going to come up through the mulch. So get those weeds out early. And you want to keep the mulch away from the plant bases, because you don't want to suffocate the plant. So you want to create, you know, the mulch around them, but lightly up around the plant, and then the deeper mulch farther away. And you don't want to mulch seedlings, because you don't want to risk that they retain too much moisture around the stems and that they would rot. And one of the primary problems you see with commercial mulching is they create what we call mulch volcanoes around the trees, where they go like this and a big pile of mulch up around the tree. That's absolutely the worst thing for the tree, because it will make the trunk of the tree rot. And you're also keeping the root flare of the tree comes out, and that tree needs that area to absorb air. You know, the tree needs oxygen too, and that's just going to damage the tree. So watch out for those. And if you see them in your neighborhood, you know, advise your friends that probably not very good for their trees. We want to restore compacted soil. We want to avoid leaving soil bare. You know, we want to avoid pesticide use, plant a diverse garden, grass cycle, use your grass in your compost pile, and allow leaves and other plant material to just decompose naturally.
Someone asked, if you were going to purchase mulch, do you have a preference, or what would you do about that?
You know, this is probably completely politically incorrect. I use hardwood bark mulch because I like the way it looks. Any plant material mulch really works well. And as I said, a lot of people do get free mulch from their jurisdictions. You can pick it up, you can bring it home in bags, and it's very economical. Free is best. And it works equally well.
Okay, great. Let's see. I think you answered this, but someone was asking, do you remove leaves that have not broken down? And you said you dug them into your border.
Yeah, it depends on the quantity. You know, if you have a lot of huge leaves, like some trees, like, you know, sycamore trees have enormous leaves. And they don't necessarily break all the way down. If you can crush them up, you can haul them away. You know, you can put them in your compost pile. If you feel like there's too much, there might be too much. You don't want to suffocate your plants. The mulch is there. The mulch is there to help. And you have to use your judgment.